kind of talk has reinforced a lot of people's temptation to fall into the pitfall of shame. And in some cases, a person's upbringing adds to the problem of shame, with messages that ring in their ears until they're 90 years old and beyond. Messages that came to them from well-meaning parents or teachers or even clergy who met their misbehavior with a very angry reaction that said something like this: "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," or "shame on you." Have any of you ever heard that from anybody? I know I have. They're messages that are hard to erase. They stay with us, and they support this feeling that somehow we really ought to be ashamed of ourselves, and that makes it hard to be honest about our shortcomings, because shame is not helpful. Shame is a trap, and shame interferes with our ability to respond to the legitimate guilt that we experience when we really do say or do something wrong. Now, as most people who do any kind of counseling, whether it's from a psychological bent or a pastoral bent or counseling with people who have different problems with addictions, any of us who do any kind of counseling, we're all very quick to point out that there is a tremendous difference between shame and legitimate guilt. One writer describes it this way, and I'm going to quote from her book. She says, "Authentic, legitimate guilt is the feeling or thought that what we did is not okay. It indicates that our behavior needs to be corrected or altered, or an amendment needs to be made. But shame, on the other hand, is an overwhelming negative sense that who we are isn't okay. Shame is a no-win situation, because we can change our behaviors, but we can't change who we are." You see, what this means is that legitimate guilt is just an indicator. It's an indicator when we feel guilty about something that maybe we ought to look at what we've been saying and doing. Maybe we need to do something about that. Maybe we really have been doing something that's hurtful to ourselves or to others or to some part of God's creation. If it's legitimate guilt, it just may be that feeling that kind of motivates us to take a look. But you see, once that legitimate guilt motivates us to take a look at some kind of offending behavior, then its job's done. It's just not needed anymore. And if it sticks around, it's not helpful. Because at that point, our job isn't to feel guilty. Our job is to change the behavior, and if possible, to make amends if we have hurt somebody with something we've said or done. And if we're unable to make the change, then our job is to find somebody that can help us, or some group that can help us make that change, even if it takes a lifetime to change. In religious terms, this is the stuff of self-examination and confession, not guilt that doesn't go away, but the ability to look at things we've said or done. That's what confession says each Sunday. We kneel and we pray a general confession. We pray and lift up and set before God those things we say that we've done that we ought not to have done, and things we've left undone that we ought to have done. And we confess it both as individuals and as a community of faith, because both as individuals and a community of faith, we have shortcomings that we need to be honest about and realize. Obviously, such confession assumes that sometime in the week before we got here, we actually took a look. We actually thought for a minute or more about things that perhaps in that week we had said or done that caused hurt, or things that we could have said or done that would have led to healing, but we just didn't say or do them. It assumes that we took time to look at that. And that's why we come and we kneel in silence, because it assumes that we brought with us those things that we want to lay before God. And so we take a time of silence before we say the confession together, so that in our hearts We can name before God silently those things that we want to bring, those things that we have identified. But then what happens with that is that once that confession has been said, and the priest gets up and gives the absolution on all of us, the effect is that God says something like this to you and to me. God says, and hear this please every time there's an absolution. God says, I now take away any guilt that you may have needed to open your eyes to the truth. All the guilt I take away. And now in place of that, I give you my strength. I give you my strength so that you can move forward with your life in a way that will lead to the change you need. See, God takes the guilt away because what God desires is that we shed the behavior, not that we keep the guilt. So if after confession and absolution, if after all that's said and done, we still feel guilty, then we need to realize that what we're feeling is not legitimate guilt. It is instead shame. And if shame itself is the problem, then we need to confess that we're stuck in shame and ask God to heal us. Ask God to take the shame away from us so that we can move on, so that we can change. Because we were not created to live in shame. We were created to be players on God's team. And the primary qualifications for membership on God's team are these three. First, that we be willing to take an honest look at the things we say and do. Secondly, that when these things are wrong, we are willing to admit it. And third, that once we acknowledge what needs to be changed in our lives, we are willing to let God make that change in us. Today, may God free us all from shame, and may God make us willing